So setting the scene, we're here today to talk about circular economy. I'll just set the scene what my thoughts are around circular economy, what I believe we should be doing as an industry around circular economy, and then I'd like to ask the panel what their thoughts are around it and what they're doing in their own businesses. So designing, I've got about 3 or 4 key themes that I believe we should be doing from a circular economy point of view. Designing for resource optimization. So this brings in reuse of existing buildings and materials, including reducing the embodied carbon by looking at things like demolition or pre-redevelopment audits, as well as being resource efficient with any new materials that we use. I think we should also be designing for optimum service life and ease of maintenance. This brings in longer life materials such as things like Bodo wood, and how it can be reduce whole life carbon through reduced maintenance and replacement, so things like that. And in designing for flexibility, deconstruction and disassembly is another key point. Remanufacture and reuse, for example, this will very much focus on end of life and bring materials, brings in things like material passports and sort of reusable systems such as some of the Ortex systems that we've got here today. So really, if I sort of start with Sidoni, what sort of things, how does that definition match your definition of a circular economy, and what steps are Foster & Partners taking to incorporate circular design within their projects? And obviously ties in with whole life carbon as well, I think also ties in with that. So over to you, Sidoni.
So all of the above that you just mentioned about circularity. But when we look at circularity and how important it is nowadays to consider that within your designs, it's not just about planning ahead, but it's also what we do in the here and now, because we are within a climate emergency. Everybody's seen the news also about Florida. So things are changing in the world. And we have this mandate really now to reduce our embodied carbon by 40% by 2030. And that's only less than 6 years away. If you think about it, that's not long. And we should really be net zero by 2050 in the built environment to be anywhere near the UN protocol of 1.5 degrees Celsius change in temperature. So I think this is the serious part of the evening. It's a real problem, and I think people really need to be aware of it. And circularity within the built environment is a really big, important part. So just, again, I've got a few figures. So at the moment, only 7% of materials that are already in use are being reused. And I'm not talking about recycling, because recycling is one thing, but in terms of reuse, there's not very much. But we also know that by, say, 2050, the building stock will be 80% of what we have now. So we are building new things, but there's a huge stock of old buildings which has a lot of material in it, and that material should be treated with value. So I think that's a really big message, that we see what's already there, and that's also part of circularity. So at the moment, we're only using 7% of when we build. This really needs to increase, and if we bring circularity into our designs, the way we treat our designs, this could be apparently up close to 40% by 2050. So I think it's about looking into the value of materials. That's really important. So what do we do about that in Foster & Partners? So we are doing a really big push and concentrating a lot on embodied carbon in the environment at the moment. So we're looking at each project that we do from an embodied carbon perspective throughout all the design stages. And circularity is part of that. Unless you're building on a greenfield site, which is probably more and more unlikely in the future, you will be building somewhere where there is already a built structure on the site. So you really need to start considering what's there and how much of that can be used, what can be done with it. So we're looking into that for each project. We'll be talking about challenges in a bit. I think that's sort of because it's not that easy. But I think, closing words on this matter, I think circularity has a really big part to play for things that are currently in distribution, that are already being built, but also for the future. And you were touching on that, designing differently for the future. So if we are using raw materials, we should be treating them very differently and sort of really valuing them differently and designing differently with those. deconstruct, yes, exactly, to think ahead, to think holistically of what will happen at the end of the life for that building. Is it adaptable? Is it reusable? And I think that's a really important message.
That's a key message that I think we need to get across today, because I think we've always thought we had to build these buildings or design buildings that they had to be really solid and stay up. They're going to be there forever. I think we're realising now that they're not there forever. Certain types of buildings, specifically may only last a certain amount of time. So we need to make sure that particularly those buildings that have a shorter life will be dismantled in the future.